Dave, here they present the World Cup of Wrestling concept, World Championship Wrestling versus New Japan. We get Jushin Liger versus Chris Benoit, Koji Kanemoto versus Alex Wright, Luger versus Chono, Johnny B. Bad against Masa Saito, Otani versus Guerrero, Tenzan versus Savage, and Sting versus Kensuke Sasaki. Some eclectic matchmaking there. What was the concept of the World Cup of Wrestling under this Eric Bischoff regime?
It was just, New Japan and them were working back and forth, and it was just, they would go to Japan. They would bring the big stars to Japan for big shows. And so this was, let's bring some of the stars in and just put on a really good card. And as I recall, it was a good card. What I remember most is the Eddie Guerrero-Otani match. I think that match was absolutely phenomenal.
It was.
Especially for the time.
They got only 13 minutes, but they packed a lot in.
Yeah.
And
I just remember, like, as far as and that was I'm trying to that was that a Hogan Savage main event?
Main event here was Ric Flair beating Randy Savage for the title. Hogan was not on the show.
Okay. That's right. Because that was when Flair and Savage were turning business.
That's right. Nitro had just debuted.
Yeah, because that was where they were 2 years earlier they were just so far down, right? At this point, they're coming back. I mean, I just remember that was the feeling at this point. It's like, were they going to, at this point in 1995, do you think they're going to overtake Vince McMahon? You don't have that feeling yet, but you do know that the worst was over. And they, again, under Eric, they were starting to sign some really great talent. I mean, Eric was more open-minded, again, like a Chris Benoit was on the roster, and Eddie Guerrero was on the roster. People like, they were Rey Mysterio was coming, it was coming in. They were just, Eric was not closed-minded about small guys, and he wasn't closed-minded about different styles and everything. I mean, the problem was the guys on top were so freaking scared, if that's the word, because they didn't want that style to be the main event style. So they made sure that those guys, they could all work with each other, but it was all mid-card. And so they didn't really get over like stars because they were always kept mid-card. But, yeah, WCW, that's when the whole thing was WWF had the better main events because WCW main events weren't always that good. Mm-hmm. But the WCW from, top to bottom blew away WWF because you had all those great guys underneath.
And Eric taking in Japan and New Japan shows through the relationship that's reflected here in the Starrcade 95 World Cup tournament is also where he basically gets his exposure, correct Dave, if we can plant this seed, to the NJPW versus UWFI feud that lit the Japanese wrestling scene on fire and provided the basic blueprint and outline for the NWO angle.
Right. I think that it was a Tokyo Dome in 95, late 95. And Eric saw just the incredible heat that entire show had and figured out what it was and just was like, hey, how can we do this? And then when National Hall became available, that's what it was. It was the fake, the outside invaders from the other promotion. Because what it was UWFI and New Japan were warring promotions that did grandstand challenges and things like that. UWFI more than New Japan because New Japan was established, but they would challenge the guys to fights and things like that. And it built up, and then UWFI, unfortunately for them, they ran into all these financial difficulties. So they had to call up New Japan and go, we're about to go out of business. Can if we feud with you, we'll all make money. Can we do this? And New Japan, took them in and just goes, now, okay, but we're in charge of all the booking. And unfortunately, New Japan did what everyone does in this situation, and that is, we're going to prove that we're the best. And so they didn't get the value that they could have because it was all about proving that, when those guys were calling us names for all those years, we're going to prove that we're not going to go 50-50 with them. We're wiping them out. And so UWF got maybe another year or so out of it that they wouldn't have had. But in the end, they still went out of business.
But they still come in strong enough in this angle that the message is clear to Bischoff that the NWO has to come in and run roughshod. He didn't inherit the idea that WCW would immediately dispatch the NWO.
Eric was the first guy to put the outsiders over, but he did that with Hogan too. Because a lot of bookers would have put Flair over Hogan just because he's our guy. And it's like, you had the war of words, like, and plus Hogan beat him in WWF, and there's all kinds of ego reasons, right?
Mm-hmm.
That you would just go like, whenever it's like, the big dream match that the fans like, with the Warren Promotions, the hometown guy always wins. And the Sheik and the Bruiser, it was like, the Sheik and the Bruiser could have gone forever in Detroit. And, the Sheik had to win right away to prove that he was right? When the Mid-South guys came to Crockett, you could have gone back and forth. No, Crockett guys had to win everything.
That's right.
With 2001 with WCW, folding and going into WWF.
Mm-hmm.
It's just like, you could have, that thing could have run for years. It could have been, that could have been the greatest feud of all time. It should have been. It's a tragedy it wasn't, because that was like the one that was no lose. But WWF had to win every freaking match practically, and even the ones WCW won, it was WWF guys on that jumped to the WCW side to win for them, as opposed to WCW guys winning. So it was still, the whole thing was just to show, hey, we were always better. It's like, hey, you won the war, you proved that. Now let's make money.
Right, to make money. Well, just want to circle back to the principles in the World Cup quickly, because you've got Liger, you've got Benoit, Kanemoto, you've got Otani and Eddie Guerrero, and come March 1996, Otani defeats Chris Benoit to become the first WCW Cruiserweight champion. So is this here the participation of a lot of these, what would come to be known as cruiserweights at Starrcade 95, sort of the beginnings of what Bischoff would see as the cruiserweight division?
Yeah, I think it was all evolving. I mean, it was really clear that they had to do something like that, because they had so many talented guys that they weren't going to put at you know what I mean? I mean, it was just a natural conclusion to come to.
Mm-hmm.
Because, the light heavyweight, they'd done the light heavyweight thing for years, and they just dropped it. I think that might have been under Bill when it just kind of faded out. I don't remember exactly. It started out strong, because I remember Brian had a lot of good light heavyweight title matches, and then, after Brian lost, and Brian had this problem with Bill, I think that it really started fading out.
Sure did. So here we are at Starrcade 95 after, as we mentioned, the debut of Nitro in September 1995, and we all know what a game-changing move that was, being green-lighted by Turner. My question on Nitro, Dave, is that, but also, did it add a boost immediately to pay-per-views? Here's the first Starrcade coming off of live Monday Night Television. It didn't add to business.
It was it wasn't an immediate. Ratings-wise, they did better from the start than I expected, because really, when they first announced it, when Eric and Ted had the meeting, and it's Ted Turner's idea. It's and it's just like, Eric didn't go there, hey, let's go head to head with WWF. Eric went with Dixie Carter, hey, let's go head to head with WWF, and it didn't work. Absolutely, that was Eric. At the time, you would think that would be the right idea, because history would tell you it was. It wasn't, but, there was a story. So this one, the history is just like, okay, there's however many people were watching wrestling on Monday night then. I don't remember the number. Might have been, let's say it's 3 million. And you're going like, oh, my God, we're going to split this 3 million. They're both going to do terrible, and WCW is going to get killed. Then when I first saw the first Nitro, the one thing is that the Nitro was, they were given main event matches.
Oh, yeah.
Raw was still mostly, you might get a main event here and there, but it was still mostly a squash match show, maybe one main event. And the main event wasn't always a big main event. This one was all, mostly, very few squash matches, and more of your characters, and Hogan wrestling a lot on Nitro, and Sting and Luger and these guys wrestling main events, Flair and everybody Savage. So when I saw the first Nitro, I immediately saw that it's going to be competitive. And, of course, Luger showing up on that first show, I think, was just, so big, because it was like a shot. It's like, okay, now we're, if you're like watching WCW and, you've watched this company go down, 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 and now it's a little bit making a comeback. And then Luger shows up, because he wasn't the top guy in WWF, but he was certainly a WWF guy who worked the night before somewhere in Canada.
Yep.
Shows up challenging Hulk Hogan. Hulk Hogan and Lex Luger had never had a match. And Lex Luger, by this point, Lex Luger had been a main eventer since, God, when?
88, pretty much. 87, he worked...
87, he was in the Horsemen, right?
Yeah, and he wrestled Dusty.
He was wrestling Dusty in 87.
Yep, for sure.
So that's top position. So we're talking, Lex, this is late 95.
Yep.
Lex has had almost a decade
Mm-hmm.
of being a top guy, and Hulk Hogan and Lex Luger is a dream match. Hulk Hogan and Sting is a dream match. And they're putting these matches on free television. They're not even putting them on pay-per-view. So it was like, with that attitude, they were gonna do real well in the ratings. And what again nobody saw coming, because it was the idea that, okay, you're gonna, let's say Raw was doing about a 3 most weeks, high 2s, 3s. So maybe between the two of them, and you get a little bit of a new audience, maybe they're both going to be fighting over, maybe we'll both get it, maybe WCW get a 1.5 and WWF will get a 2.5, and maybe, hey, WCW's looking good. Maybe we're going to be fighting, and we're going to be fighting over low 2s. And at the beginning, they were fighting over mid 2s. And then it got bigger and bigger and bigger. And WCW, the first, until Scott Hall showed up, really, it was back and forth. It was a competitive thing. And then as soon as Scott Hall shows up, and the other thing that happens, they move Nitro to 2 hours, they're the show, and Raw's in the dust. And that was the 83-week deal that everybody talks about.